are the resistors.
Good evening, resistors. Hope you all had a nice bunch of poisonous pancakes. I had a lovely pancake made with vegetable-derived butter, battery farm eggs, topped with aspartame syrup. And it was actually quite a sloppy mess because the pan didn't work properly. But anyways, this isn't the Shrove Tuesday show, it's the WideShut Webcast with me, Keelan Balderson. I've gone back to calling this the WideShut Webcast instead of WideShut Radio, which I kind of made the switch. I don't know if anybody even noticed, but I've changed back because the weekly news show on YouTube, I don't know if I can keep it up, guys. It's quite a lot of work. I always have this problem where I have all these great ideas and I just end up trying to do too much at once, and you know, I can't get everything done. So I've kind of stopped that show for now. It's on hiatus. So perhaps maybe what I'll do in the future is film this radio show and put that on YouTube with, you know, a few added clips, a few extra effects and stuff. That way it reduces the time I need to create a whole new show each week, which would have been on top of the radio show. So I think maybe I'm just going to stick with Resistance Radio for now. And the reason why I'm doing this is because of my upcoming films. As I've said a few times now, I'm working on a remake of 7-7 The Big Picture, which right now is entitled 7-7 in Question. 7-7 in Question. A sort of play on words of the recent inquest, but I might change it before I release it, I'm not sure. And of course the inquest left many questions unanswered and brought up a few more questions that also need answering. As far as 7-7 The Big Picture goes, I've taken into account some of the criticism, some of the feedback people have made. The main one being the narration, which was kind of slow. A couple of people pointed that out. I didn't really notice how bad it was when I was making the film. Firstly, because it was my first film, and I wasn't really sure how to do it anyway. But I sort of did it in chunks because, as I uploaded it on YouTube in 15-minute chunks, it's all done. And it seemed all right when I was doing that, but when listening back to it all together, I do agree that it just sounded a little bit weird, kind of, really slow. So in the Redux, I'll be talking faster so nobody falls asleep. As I also mentioned on the Corbett report on Saturday, I think the length was a bit of an issue also. We're talking over 4.5 hours long. That is kind of long. Although a lot of it, it was relevant information. But a lot of people have short attention spans, and if you're trying to reach the average person, it's probably better to make a shorter 2.5 hour film, which would probably have a better impact and wake more people up than this really, super long film that not everyone's going to sit down and watch, to be quite honest. So I will be cutting some things. I think maybe, things like the Kosovo bit of the film, maybe I didn't really need to go into that much detail. The main point on that was that the CIA and MI6 funded and trained more mujahideen in the 90s to fight the Serbians during the Kosovo crisis, just like when the CIA worked with bin Laden in the 80s. That was the main point. And, I kind of got into the Kosovo crisis and got into details about Milosevic and the contrived nature of that whole war. And I don't think that's necessarily important if I'm trying to focus on 7-7. So, I was going to stick to the original script and just sort of tighten it up a bit, but as I've been going through it all today and the other day, I'm actually going to write a completely new script. because it was kind of clunky. There was a few strange sentences in there. I've kind of become hypercritical of it now. So I'm going to be doing an entirely new script, more concise, more to the point, cutting a few things out here and there. And I'm actually going to try and make it in DVD format this time, because I know some people bought the copy on disc, but it was WMV, the Windows Media files, on a DVD rather than DVD format, so it wouldn't play in all DVD players. I did make that clear, but because it was so long, basically. But hopefully I'm going to cut it to a proper DVD sort of size, and then I'm going to try and shop it around to places like Edge Media and Paradigm Shift TV, because I did send it to them. They kind of overlooked it this time, but maybe if I make it a proper sort of DVD format, then they'll be willing to take a look at it. Because, I mean, they still play things like the ripple effect, and I don't think that's particularly helpful, because there's been so much info since that film came out. You know, it might be worth them actually taking the time to look at some of the new films that are out. I mean, it's not just mine. There's 7/7 Seeds of Deconstruction by Tom Secker. There was also a lot of other 7/7 films out at the time that haven't got the same amount of play, which I think were better than Ripple Effect. But, you know, whatever. We won't harp on that. I'm just going to check the chat, see if everyone can actually hear me. I'm not cutting out or anything like that. No, it seems okay. Yeah, so as well as the 7/7, the big picture redux, this which I'm going to call 7/7 in question, as I said before, I'm also working on the Who Owns Britain film, and I'm actually glad I left that a while before getting stuck into it, because just over these last few months I've come to understand the financial system a lot more clearer than I did even, you know, when I first thought about making the film. So hopefully, you know, that will reflect it in the finished product. I think I've got a firm grasp of how things are. Now I just need to go out and find footage and hopefully film some footage and maybe get some interviews or whatever. I know Graham Sharkey, the economic assassin, expressed some interest in sort of helping me with that, so hopefully that will go down. And then there's the other film I said I was making on the New World Order, and we've kind of had a big setback on that because I'd already made about 20 minutes of it, and for whatever stupid reason I deleted some of the source video that went with that. So on the Sony Vegas editing program, basically on the storyboard, it's not rendered yet, but you know, you have a storyboard where you chop up the clips and put the effects on and whatever. Because I deleted the source videos and files, there's loads of empty chunks everywhere. It's quite a good first 20 minutes, and I can't even remember exactly what videos I used and where I got them from. So that's kind of slowed that one down. But hopefully if I can get working my ass off and I'm not sidetracked with anything else, then I should be able to get all 3 of these films done by 2012. And if the world ends, I'm going to be pissed. All that work down the pan. So on today's show then, folks, going to be talking a bit about 7/7, some of the things I didn't quite get to on the Corbett report, and some other headlines. But before we get onto some of this, I want to go to some headlines in my local newspaper, because I was reading this earlier today and my blood was boiling. Yeah, my sister always laughs at me when I read the newspaper because I just get angry at nearly every story. You know, it's either climate change this or, you know, whatever. It just... But some of the headlines in my local paper today: town CCTV system an embarrassment. And this is this big hoo-ha about how the CCTV is not working and there's not enough people to operate them. Well, what I say to that is, good, because they don't work anyway. It says, CCTV has come under fire recently, with some parish councils asking for evidence that the cameras actually help to catch criminals. And the news that monitoring the station at, I won't say the town, but police station, is often unmanned due to lack of volunteers. Well, the point they're making there, that they would like evidence that it actually, that CCTV helps to catch criminals. Well, I think the national statistics on that are that no, it doesn't really. It doesn't help to prevent crime, at least. I know Mr. Britt interviewed Steve Jolly some months back about CCTV and how it doesn't. And sometimes, you know, they'll present it in court and it doesn't even help, you know, get a conviction or whatnot. So it is kind of a point of contention. Obviously, everyone here at Resistance Radio is well aware of the track and trace grid and the sort of Big Brother state. What is it? One camera for every 30 people or something like that in England. That's insane, if you ask me. So that was one headline in my local paper that kind of got me angry earlier today. Then there's this insane story, this absolutely ridiculous story of a young mother who got fined for counterfeiting money by the Bank of England because she'd photocopied a few £20 notes for her to play with, basically, and for whatever reason she was fined for that. Let me just pull this up. I would paste it in the chat, but I don't know if I want to actually give away the town that I live in. I know I've given away a lot of my details, but I don't know whether it's worth saying that, because it's a small town. You'd probably find me if you went walking around the town in the middle of the day or something. But exclusive, little girl's Monopoly money lands mum big fine. A roll of poor fake £20 notes, which were inside a box bought at a car boot sale, which is like I don't know, in America, what do you call it, a garage sale or whatever, landed a mum on income support with a £365 court bill. The notes were still on an uncut roll. Basically, they were printed. You know, they even describe it in here like it's some kind of counterfeiting thing. No, it's just someone printing it off a printer, for God's sake. And described in court as looking like Monopoly money. Jodie Moon, 27, kept them only because her tiny daughter wanted to use them with a toy shop till. So actually, she wasn't even the one that printed them. They were inside a box that they bought at a car boot sale. I guess some kind of trinket or something. But the mum fell foul of the Forgery and Counterfeiting Act of 1981 and pleaded guilty to having in her custody a thing which she knew or believed to be a counterfeit of a currency note, namely 480 in £20 notes. Yeah, but it's not it's not real. It's on a piece of paper. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'd like to lawyer getting her to plead guilty and to admit that she was in possession of a counterfeit of a currency note. It wasn't a counterfeit. It was a fake print. It's not like it was anything that looked realistic. It wasn't even cut up into £20 to, like, you know, give to a shop or whatever. The magistrate's court on Thursday fined Moon £265 and ordered her to pay 85 costs and 15 in victim surcharge. Victim surcharge? What the hell does that mean? Who's the victim of this crime? Presiding magistrate Jenny Faree Cook said the fine was at the top end of the scale because it was such a serious offence. Right. Maybe we need to go to that court and arrest her. The court heard police executed a search warrant at Moon's home in Long Road, Tidgoat. Yep, I live in 6, folks. That's not where I live, but it's nearby. And yeah, so there was a search warrant for this fake Monopoly money, you know, well, printed money on a piece of paper that she found in a box that she gave to a kid at a car boot to play with. Jill Derby, prosecuting, said police entered through the conservatory and came across a roll of 20 notes with a total face value of 480. No, there was no face value because they were not realistic at all. The notes, get this, the notes were sent to the Bank of England, and an official from the bank confirmed they were not genuine. Ooh, you need to send it all the way to the Bank of England to confirm it. Solicitor David Naghen, mitigating, told magistrates it was a slightly unusual offence and didn't even appear in guidelines. Yeah, because it's so ridiculous. He said it was a strict liability offence and a person was guilty as charged simply by being in possession of a copy of a banknote. So basically, folks, if you have a picture of a banknote, you know, watch your computers, watch your laptops. If you've got a picture of a banknote on your computer, then that must be a copy of a banknote. So far as the law was concerned, it didn't matter whether a note was in a fit state to be passed off as real, i.e. whether it was a good counterfeit or otherwise. And the solicitor said, I would say these were clearly fake notes and she never had any intention of using them. Just completely ridiculous. And something interesting to note out of this, the actual notes that they're claiming were counterfeit notes, they weren't actually presented at the court because the Bank of England has authority over all counterfeit notes. So they sent it to the Bank of England. The Bank of England says, yeah, this is counterfeit. And then the Bank of England doesn't send it to the court for evidence. So you have to take the Bank of England's word for it that it's a counterfeit note. How ridiculous is that? If you want to know who's running the country, how about you look at that? They're allowed to break the normal procedures of law because they're the Bank of England. What was it? You know, give me control of a nation's money and I care not who writes the laws. Well, there it is, in plain sight. The notes didn't have anything like a silver stripe down the side and were merely photocopies. What a completely bizarre story that is. And what I want to know is, how did they know? Did somebody at the car boot see these notes and report them or something? Or was it a sting operation? Did the person that put them in the box, was it a big setup to get this woman fined? I mean, who has the time to snoop on somebody like that and say, oh look, this kid's playing with a piece of paper with a picture of a £20 note on? It's ridiculous. So that was one thing that made my blood boil while reading my local newspaper today. And the third thing was, of course, the census. Lovely article with all these smiley census workers in their lovely purple t-shirts standing there, telling us how great the census is, how it's valuable information for deciding how the budget is allocated. What budget? We're pushing 4.8 trillion in national debt. There is no budget. No matter what they spend on public services, it's all borrowed on top of the debt. So there's no budget to begin with. So that's just a ridiculous claim if you ask me anyway. I'll just read it out a bit. Questionnaires are to be posted out to an estimated 26 million households across England and Wales as the 2011 census begins. The survey documents will start to drop through letterboxes from Tuesday in one of the biggest single mail-outs the Royal Mail has ever handled. Television adverts, blah blah blah, brainwashing. The big operation will employ 35,000 field staff as advisors, coordinators, enumerators and census collectors. And it will make 482 million, well it won't make, that's how much they're paying to collect all this information. Householders will be asked a range of questions covering areas such as national identity, ethnic group, qualifications, job titles, how they get to work, all that kind of personal information. I don't know where I stand on this, folks, because I haven't done the research. I'm not sure exactly the methods around this. I'm not sure whether they enforce fines. My first thought was that this was basically like the TV license, in that you could just not answer the door, remove your implied right of access, and eventually they'll go away. But it appears that it's going to be a little more stricter than that. So it depends how headstrong you want it. You know, I'd see this as a perfect opportunity to start some kind of lawful rebellion. I mean, if you're not much of a protester, if you normally just do things online, you know, maybe this is the time that you can say, right, sod it, I'm not filling this thing out. Let me read some more of this out. Where's it gone? Great, now my browser wants to crash. Well, anyway, folks, we'll ignore the rest of the article. Obviously, most of you now know that the company, or one of the companies that have been given the contract to help process this census information, is Lockheed Martin. I don't know, Lee Woodberg got into this on a couple of occasions. For those that don't know, Lockheed Martin is basically the epitome of the military-industrial complex. If you just scroll to their Wikipedia page, Lockheed Martin is among the largest defense contractors in the world, and in 2008, 70% of Lockheed Martin's revenues came from military sales. Is that a company we wish to support? I don't think so. Scroll down a bit more. The company's 2010 lobbying expenditure, so the amount of money they spend on bribing government officials, was at 13.7 million. That's how much money they bribe officials with each year. You know, campaign contributions, pushing different legislations and things like that. I mean, do we really want to support this company? No, I don't think so. Through its Political Action Committee, the company provides low levels of support to candidates who advocate national defense and relevant business issues. So you're probably looking at things like body scanners and things like that in the airport. Lockheed Martin employs Political Action Committee in one of... Okay, that's not a readable sentence, never mind. With contributions from 3,000 employees, it donates $500,000 a year to about 260 House and Senate candidates, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, a sort of UK branch of Lockheed Martin has got the contract to process our personal data. And people have brought up the point that under the Patriot Act, Lockheed Martin is somewhat obliged to basically, there's a loop that could end up that our data goes to the Pentagon. I don't know whether that's a bit of fear-mongering, a bit of exaggerations, but the bottom line, do you really want a war-mongering Skynet-style company? Just the perfect example of an evil corporation processing your personal data. No, I don't want that. And there's articles in the mainstream press about boycotting the census. Processors say they are willing to break the law and face a $1,000 fine and a criminal record by refusing to fill in the 32-page questionnaire. You know, there's a whole group of anti-war groups, pacifists, religious organizations, and digital activists I don't know whether that refers to resistance radio style activists, or if they mean people that campaign against databases or whatever. They're raising public awareness about the role of Lockheed Martin, America's largest arms manufacturer, the company which makes Trident nuclear missiles, cluster bombs and F-16 fighter jets. So they design and build weapons that kill other human beings. They won the $150 million contract to run the census on behalf of the Office for National Statistics. I mean, this is not even a UK company. You'd think in this great recession would be at least giving contracts to UK companies. And then the Green Party has dropped its original opposition to Lockheed Martin's lead role because the census is extremely important and needs to be accurate. Yep, that's the Green Party for you folks. If anything, they're the ones destroying the world. And I don't know how many of you know Tony Rogers, or otherwise known as Tony Legend of the Tony Legend Show, but he passed along some information to me earlier on Facebook because I'd asked people if they got their census yet, because I haven't had time to look into it really. I plan on, doing whatever I can to get out of it, or at least fudge what's on there. But he sent me this information, and I hope I'm not dropping him in it, but I think he's actually taken some kind of temporary job with the census team or whatever. I don't know whether he's being a mole on the inside or whatever, because this guy's a resistance fighter. But yeah, he told me someone in your house has to fill in the census, otherwise they have a non-compliance unit give you hell. So basically, if you don't fill it in, you have these purple shirted people coming around to offer on how to fill it in. Yeah, I'm not sure on the has to fill it in. I mean, no one's gonna put a gun to your head. However, as long as someone in your house fills it out, there is a way that anyone else in the house who doesn't want to be included can escape without any further contact with the census. And basically, he says the technique to, say you've got, your whole family, and the dad just fills it out. You can ask for separate forms for each member of the family, and then only one member of the family fills out theirs, and for whatever reason, they won't come back and harass the other, how many people are in the house that didn't fill out their forms. And that's supposedly a relatively easy way to get some of you out of filling it in. There must be some way around it. I mean, obviously you can just say sod off and try and deal with whatever comes your way anyway. I mean, there's no such thing as debtor's prison, so if they give you a fine, what's going to make you pay it? Just don't pay it. And that's probably not always an easy thing for some people. You might live with a wife who doesn't quite understand everything, might get a bit worried or whatever. I'm not sure, folks. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to do some digging into this, because there's no way I'm going to be supporting Lockheed Martin. Also, something I didn't mention, Capita is also one of the companies that are involved in this. And Capita is the firm that collects sends people around for the TV license, and I'm pretty experienced with dealing with that. It's just a simple case of ring the door or sending them certain letters, but I don't know, I'll have to look into it really. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the chat has any interesting links regarding this, or no, it doesn't seem like they're talking about it. I don't know if I plan on not doing it. I don't know what everyone else plans on doing. I mean, there will be a way. There's always a way. I mean, are they really gonna keep paying people to come around and harass you? somebody noted on a message that in their local job centre it was advertised that there's temporary jobs for the census from March until May. And basically what that implies is that after May there's not going to be enough people to go around and enforce it. So there's always thousands of people that slip through the net. So I mean, yeah, there's... Moving on then, I guess I'll get into some more details on the 7/7 inquest and some of the implications around some of this new 7/7 information. What I'll do is I'll play a song and check out the chat and then come back with some more details on 7/7 that I didn't cover on the Corbett report. Yes, folks, we don't have to live like refugees or slaves or any other kind of label that you could give us. Yeah, so on this census, I just had one thought. If they address the occupier, you know, to the occupier, it may be that if you never answer the door or respond, then they can never actually get, you know, who you are, and it never goes anywhere, because that's what happens with the TV license. If you never pay the license, they never get your name, and they never get your name if you never open the door and give your name, so then they can never do anything anyway. It would also be interesting to know if they can secure search warrants, because with the TV license they can't. There's freedom of information. People have basically asked how many search warrants have been given in relation to non-payment of TV license, and they basically back off because they know that no, that's never happened. They've never secured a search warrant for TV license. So maybe it's the same with the census. But as I said, I've not looked into it. I don't know the details. I'm sure the Lawful Rebellion crowd have got some information on it, but you know, they tend to be a little bit long-winded in what they do, and they border on the free man on the land kind of mentality. I'm not sure. You know, I just want to know what you got to do. Is it shut the door or what? But we'll see. We'll see in the coming weeks. I'll probably do a show next week and tell everybody what I did or didn't do. But yeah, onto this 7/7 stuff, because the inquest is basically finished. We're waiting for the coroner's final verdict, which, you know, what do you expect her to say? Not a lot, really. And it didn't really reveal a whole lot. There was a few new bits of mostly irrelevant CCTV. There was quite a bit about the emergency response, which is important. There was kind of failings there on the emergency services part due to, you know, a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. But that's a separate issue really to the whys and hows of the attacks themselves. And there was a bit more clarification on the supposed DNA evidence, which I got into on the Corbett report, but it's still a little bit dubious. If you haven't checked out that interview, it is on my YouTube, so be sure to check it out. But really, the main problem with the inquest was that it wasn't an inquiry. It wasn't an independent investigation like all the family members have been calling for years. The problem with the inquest was it was an inquest, so it was limited in scope. They didn't have to delve into certain aspects. There wasn't a jury. It wasn't a case of finding out who's guilty of the attacks and the different contributing factors. They'd already made up their mind. You know, it wasn't a case of actually proving the official narrative, which they can't because it's full of holes, as I've shown in my film. And it did ask a few questions, and some nuggets of information has come out. One of the questions was preventability. You know, could MI5 have stopped it? But that doesn't then mean that MI5 will actually be held accountable, because under the inquest's scope, they don't have to attribute blame on anyone. It's not about attributing blame on people. So basically all it was a presentation of the official story to the family members. So it was calling out the different witnesses, the officials, whatever, and sort of just going over the official story with a few bits of evidence, rather than actually investigating the official story. So, you know, it was just a presentation of the government account, really. And right off the bat in April, a barrister for some of the family members told the coroner, this lady Justice Hallett, they said, "We think there was significant intelligence known about two of the bombers, which there was, that could have been utilised to prevent the attacks. Therefore, we want a proper investigation by the scope." Graham Folks, a victim family member, also called for a bigger investigation after the Junaid Babar story came out about this intelligence asset that likely trained Mohammed Sadiq Khan, the 7/7 bomber, in Pakistan while he was on the payroll. So you've got all these family members calling for a wider scope, a bigger investigation. They've called for an inquiry since day one. The inquest ordinarily would have happened the very year or the year after the attacks, but because of all these other dodgy trials going on, they had to push it back even further. You know, 5 years later, they get this shoddy inquest. And it's ridiculous how you have MI5 that have had all this data on the alleged bombers. They had several photos of Khan and Tanweer, but of course one was so terribly cropped that it couldn't be recognized. You know, it was non-recognizable. It was photocopied in black and white, copied, cut out in what looked like, you know, Microsoft Paint, and you couldn't tell who it was. But they had these photos. Makes you wonder why they were so poorly cropped. You know, there was surveillance of them meeting twice with the ringleader of the fertilizer bomb plot, which took place before 7/7. There were phone records between this Omar Khayyam of the fertilizer plot and Mohammed Sadiq Khan. They were tailed after meeting the fertilizer bombers, and they got the car registered to Khan's address. Khan was filmed at a leisure activity day out with a bunch of different terrorists, and they had all this information, and there's all these questions about that, and instead of truly investigating, could MI5 have been held responsible for this, instead what they do is they get an MI5 agent, they don't tell anybody their name, they put them behind a big screen, and then they ask the MI5 agent, could MI5 have done anything to prevent the attacks? And this witness G guy says no, and that's it. That's case closed. That's the deepest they go into it on MI5's role. Just asking this official talking head for MI5. He's not going to say, yeah, it was all our fault, sorry, we helped facilitate this whole thing. And it's just ridiculous. It really, really is. And one thing I like to focus on, which gives a wider perspective to the attacks, whether there was some kind of outside help along with it, I do now think it's highly likely that the 7/7 bombers were at least on the trains. But at the same time, there's still a history that we kind of need to go into to understand if they did carry out these attacks, why it's still contrived. And as I said, I don't rule out that there was some extra help there with the bombs and this kind of thing, because Well, we can get to that in a bit, but I think when trying to understand 7/7, it's important to context. You know, what was Britain doing up until that point? Well, throughout the 90s, there was this policy called the Covenant of Security, which meant Britain allowed known radicals and terrorists to operate freely within the UK. They're allowed to fly in and out despite being on terror lists. And the whole thing was, we'll let you operate in this country so long as you don't attack this country. So they could plot, they could do whatever they wanted as long as the targets were foreign. And under this policy, two radical preachers came to prominence. Abu Hamza was the first guy, this hook-handed, I'm sure you've all seen the photos and know what I'm on about, this hook-handed preacher called Abu Hamza. And he operated the Finsbury Park Mosque, which many experts have said was a hub, basically, a big provocateur mosque, if you like. And another character, Omar Bakri, he also came to prominence under this policy, and he led the extremist group Al-Muhajirun, which became Islam for UK and is now a watered down, almost a media provocateur tool, but it was a lot more hardcore back then. And both of these men knew each other, and the 7/7 bombers had attended their sermons. The alleged mastermind of the 7/7 attacks that got away with it, Harun Aswat, he was associated with Abu Hamza. Abu Hamza supposedly sent this guy to open a terror training camp in Oregon. Junaid Babar, the supergrass, the asset that trained the bombers, he was known to these men. He knew who these men were. He was part of the US branch of Al-Muhajirun. This other suspected asset, Mohammed Qayyum Khan, he was an associate of these men. You know, they all knew each other. It was a big network of what is highly likely were mainly provocateurs, or were at least allowed and enabled and encouraged to certain degrees to do certain things. And basically, under this policy, which French intelligence, they've mocked Britain. They called London Londonistan, because, you know, of how blatant this all was under this policy of appeasement. And these radical preachers and all these other characters were basically allowed to radicalize young British Muslims. And while this was happening during the 90s, there was the Kosovo crisis, which I got to in the big picture, with the Serbians and the Albanians. And it's since come out in mainstream news that just like the Soviet-Afghan war, where the Mujahideen were trained and funded by the CIA and MI6 were funding Muslim radicals once again, this time to fight the Serbians. And these radical preachers, Abu Hamza and Omar Bakri and all these people, who have been accused of being intelligence assets by a number of people, and who admit themselves in interviews that they were at least closely monitored. These guys, Bakri in particular, was allowed to send young British men overseas to terror training to aid the war with the Serbians. This was done through the quote-unquote Kosovo Liberation Army, which is now known as a terrorist organisation. So the point I'm making is British intelligence and the CIA knew full well about these networks in Britain. In fact, it was the policy of to allow them to operate. But, of course, as the 2000s rolled in, these networks began targeting Britain itself. And in a roundabout way, we got 7/7. So if you stick strictly to history, if you ignore the anomalies of the day itself, at the very least, 7/7 was blowback for this completely careless policy. And if you couple that with the invasion of Iraq, which obviously angered the Muslim community, and there was a memo given to Tony Blair that said, if you do this, if you invade Iraq, the Muslim community or fringe elements of it will be sort of encouraged into action. So even if you don't dig too deep, you still have to look toward the Anglo-American establishment and its of the Muslim extremists as the root cause of these attacks. Now, something I was talking to with Tom Secker, who did the other documentary that came out at the same time as mine, this covenant of security idea could be almost an official line that somewhat masks what was really going on, because they can say, oh, we had this policy, it was a big blunder, we had this agreement that if we didn't attack each other and we just let them get on with it, they would only attack foreign targets, and they broke that agreement. Well, it's highly likely that there never was an actual agreement. It was more like, you know, just do what the hell you like, we're going to allow these attacks to happen. If you understand what I'm saying. It's almost there's this meme, I'll use a word that Cookie uses, there's this meme that everything the British government do and the intelligence aid, big cock up and they're useless. Well, that lets them get away with it. They were cozying up with these radicals, you know, they were allowing them to do these things. And if you think about it, are the intelligence agencies going to be that dumb to think that if they allow these networks to operate, that they're not going to end up biting them on the ass? Are they so dumb that they missed all the jihadi videos about jihad taking over Europe? You know what I'm saying? So it's almost it's an official statement that yes, we were essentially working with the radicals, but it's at the same time it's a bit of disinformation, possibly. So, you know, get the cogs working and see what you guys think on that. But I'll be addressing that in the upcoming film. Another interesting point that I wanted to bring up that I didn't get to on the Corbett report was this. I think I might be jumping the gun on it. It might not be as significant as it sounds, but from what I can see, a temporary morgue that the 7/7 victims' bodies went to, the contract for that temporary morgue, the official go-ahead for this DeBoer company to be the supplier of temporary morgues for the government under crisis management, the contract for that went into effect on July 6th, the day before the attacks. Specifically when these facilities would be needed. Now, this was an ongoing process. It's not quite as sinister as it sounds, but it still sounds kind of dodgy. I've got to look into it a bit more. After 9/11, there was something called the Mass Fatality Plan, which was an ongoing process of determining what would happen in a crisis if there was mass casualties. And they determined that there wasn't enough morgue facilities for a big crisis in London, so they began looking for firms that could create these crisis centres, these crisis morgues, you know, within a few hours. Had all the facilities to sort of make a makeshift morgue for lots of people. And the company got the go-ahead for this on the day before the attacks. So that's another thing we can sort of add to the list. Another point. There was another point. The Ikra bookshop. You may have watched my news report on this guy Martin Gilbertson, who worked in the Ikra bookshop, claims to have sent information before the attacks because there was all this jihadist literature in this bookshop where they all worked. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, because something the J7 Truth Campaign have recently done quite a bit of research on was this guy called Martin McDade, who also worked at the Ikra bookshop. And it turns out this guy was an ex-soldier and anti-terrorist operative who suddenly converted to Islam and began calling himself Abdullah. And according to Martin Gilbertson, this guy who sent the information on the bombers, or supposedly did, he could be just a nutcase, it was this McDade character who was the most radical out of all of them. And here's the guy that was a former anti-terrorist operative. So we've got to ask this question, whether he was some kind of provocateur within this bookshop. And if we add that to the list, so you have the alleged bombers, right? In the 90s, they're influenced by the intelligence asset radical preachers in Finsbury Park, in the Finsbury Park Mosque and Al-Majah Haroun and all that. Then they go work at this bookshop and they're probably influenced by this ex-anti-terrorist operative raving about Islam. Then they get in contact with this other guy who's a suspected asset, who sends them to a terror training camp which was ran by another suspected asset. There's a picture emerging, folks, where it appears this was some kind of big intelligence operation. Now, not all of this is known for a fact. Some of these suspected assets might not have, or might not have been as controlled as you might think. But even if a bit of this information is true, it still asks a whole lot of questions about what the security services were really doing. And of course there was umpteen drills and operations that were predicting attacks on the London Underground before the attacks themselves. On one of the final days of the inquest, the MI5 guy behind, the anonymous guy, said there was no inkling of attacks on the London Underground. Well, there was the Panorama program. There was a mock drill in 2003 of bombs on the Underground. There was the Atlantic Blue anti-terror operation that involved America and Britain that envisaged attacks on the London Underground. There was drills in the days leading up to the attacks of envisaged attacks on the London Underground. Then on the day itself, Peter Power was in an office talking about how we could prepare for an attack on the London Underground while there was an attack on the London Underground. So I think it's pretty clear that, there was some pretty solid information going around that, yes, there was going to be some attacks looming on the London Underground. And, of course, they lowered the terror threat level before the attacks, in a few weeks before the attacks, which took police out of London. So, something dodgy was going on there, folks, as we well know there was. So I'll be getting to a lot of that information in my upcoming film. I know I've covered a lot of it already, but I'm trying to make it more concise, quicker, more powerful. But I think that about wraps it up today, folks. Maybe I'll leave something before it cuts out. Some more Tom Petty, probably. Let me find some. Anyway, I don't believe Cookie has a show coming up. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it said cancelled on the main page. I'm not sure. But here's a bit of Immortal Technique. Laters.